Masha Gessen, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here.
I want to ask you, because you have survived and lived through your own autocracy in Russia. So talk to me about what appears to be a 180 in US speak and relations with Russia over Ukraine and, of course, with Europe. This week, President Trump called Zelensky the dictator, amongst other kind of Putin talking points. What do you see happening?
I see Trump adopting Putin's language. I see Moscow reeling from, their wildest dreams coming true faster than they could ever have imagined. And I see this country rewarding Putin's aggression and throwing Ukraine and the rest of Europe under the bus.
Putin has said that all of this reaction is, quote, hysteria, and that why shouldn't we talk to the US? And of course, Ukraine will be involved. Is there anything that you could say might be happening behind the scenes that wouldn't result in essentially throwing Ukraine under the bus and isolating Europe?
I really believe at looking at the thing and not looking for the thing behind the thing. I think we know what's happening. They're telling us. And Putin has been telling us what he wants for a very long time. He wants to get back to the post-World War II status quo, when the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. He feels like he has been dealt a bad deal in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that Russia he personally deserves, to get back to Yalta and to divide up the world again. That is very clearly what he has been saying, what he has been signaling, and his people have been signaling in the last couple of weeks as they've actively started talking to Trump. And it doesn't look like Trump is going to stop that from happening.
So
I think that the idea of dividing up the world is appealing to Trump too.
Spheres of influence.
Right.
And
I think physically dividing up the world. It's not just spheres of influence. I think he imagines recarving the map.
Can I ask you, because again, you have lived in and, thoroughly examined Putin's Russia. Is this administration a match for Putin, Lavrov, etc., around a negotiating table?
I don't know. I mean, I could probably try to answer that question, and probably the answer is no, because Putin and Lavrov have thought harder about this. They're actually better at this than Trump and his people are. They're still quite inexperienced, even if they're more competent than the first administration. But I'm not even sure it's the right question, in the sense that they don't have competing interests. They are actually on the same side of the table.
When Zelensky counters that Trump is in a disinformation space, I mean, he is stepping outside a lane of careful courting of his American backers over the past 3 years, of being very, very aware that without at least their weaponry, he might not be in the position that he is right now, as bad as it is. How do you read what Zelensky is doing?
I see Zelensky as the only politician on the world stage right now whom we're actually seeing having the courage of his convictions. He's calling things what they are. He is speaking up for a democratic Europe. He's calling for Europe to mobilize for the interests and the values that it was founded upon. And he is the only person doing that.
And what do you think will happen with Europe? Do you think Europe can... I mean, it does look as if President Trump is, as the former British Prime Minister Sir John Major said, essentially realigning America away from Europe while, quote, cuddling up to Putin's Moscow. Do you see that happening? And what do you think could happen to Europe?
Well, if Europe doesn't want to be carved up by this crazy new America and Russia, then Europe has to probably create its own army, its own defense alliance, and articulate its own strategic interests. It's hard to imagine that happening because we don't see a united Europe. In fact, it's probably less united than it's been at any point in the 3 years since the start of the war in Ukraine.
So then what happens?
It's hard to predict disaster. I think that there are many, there are many moving parts and there are certainly many variables. But what we do know is that Putin wants a lot more than Ukraine. He has been, again, very clearly, without really any kind of hidden agenda, threatening other European countries, including Poland, including the Baltic states, most recently through his ideologue, Alexander Dugin, Germany. Right? So his sights are on Europe. And Europe's line of defense has basically been Ukraine. For the last 3 years, the United States, under the Biden administration, and Europe have basically been saying, we are okay with the war in Ukraine continuing as long as it's just Ukrainians dying. Right? It's important to keep Ukraine from losing that war because then it will spread to the rest of Europe. But we only want Ukrainians to die. And now we're seeing the results of that. And if that line of defense falls, all of Europe can fall.